All right, guys. Ryan D is ZZP.
And I'm Al.
He's always still Al. But today, guys, we're here to talk to you about what is and isn't needed to know for ordering a PCM tune through ZZPerformance. All right, guys. So, a common question we get through email is something to the extent of, hey, I just got X part. Do I need to tune for it? Hey, I'm going to get this part later. Do I need to retune my PCM? I just got one. So today we're going to clear up a little bit of the smoke and mirrors about what you actually need to tune for and what you don't need to tune for. I was going to give you the tech on this. I'm going to go over the general stuff just so you have an idea of what you may or may not need to adjust for your PCM tune. Obviously, these are for our platform cars, so you guys that are watching us that may not have a platform car, I can't always say this will always be across the board, but it's pretty across the board for all the GM vehicles that we deal with here at ZZPerformance.
It's worth noting on what you just said that part of the reason we don't need a ton of information for your base file is because of our platform specialties. We have done thousands of the various setups of the different cars that we work on. So our base files are very, very dialed in to where as long as your car is in proper working order, that's a very key point. The base file is going to start up and run safely for you to drive the car, get some data, and do whatever you need to do. Now, for a milder setup, most often that base file will completely cover whatever you have. Yes, they do have to be a tiny bit on the conservative side to make up for the variances, and that's why we strongly recommend getting HP tuners, even if it's just as a rental, even if it's just to do a couple safety logs to make sure that everything's on point.
So guys, a few things. I'm going to go over a few different parts that we have here that you really don't need to always tune for. Like I said, car specific. So the first one, I'm actually calling out you 3800 guys, you LSJ guys. Number one, well, yes, we know this is not a LSJ or 300 pulley, but your supercharger pulley. So a lot of people will say, hey, I'm going from a 3.0 to 2.9 pulley. Don't I need to retune for that? The answer, no, absolutely not. So guys, remember, a blower is a positive displacement blower, and it has an efficiency range, most like every turbo and other things like that, but it has a certain range that you want to be in for boost. You just want to make sure to select the right one for your octane and your mods that's going to actually allow you to be within that boost range. On a 300 without an intercooler, it's about 6 to 8 pounds. On an LSJ, it's usually in the realm of 12 to 15, maybe 16 pounds.
One of the easy ways I can throw a little bit of tech into that's pretty easy to understand is you have to remember that most of the all of the vehicles we work on utilize a mass airflow sensor that measures the mass of the air going into the engine, which does change based on different pulley sizes, but it also changes based on if you don't have the pedal all the way to the floor, if you live in Colorado versus Atlanta, or if you're tuning in summertime versus wintertime. All of those things will change the mass of air going into the engine at a given operating range, but no one stops and thinks, oh crap, I need a retune because the weather got 30 degrees colder. Because you don't. The mass airflow sensor scale, when it is adjusted properly, automatically accounts for these slight variances. So as Ryan was saying, the pulley size selection is not something you just grab what you want and then we tune around it. It is your responsibility to select the appropriate pulley for your setup. You are more than welcome to ask if you need some help picking that out. However, on most, if not all, of our 1.0 pages, we have a few notes in there to kind of get you in the right range.
And that's actually a good point that I was brought up too, guys. Typically, as something I like to say when you call in or email in, if it's not on the page for our 1.0 PCMs, most times we don't need to know. So, for instance, notice we never asked about a pulley size, but it's a common misbelief that people, you gotta change your pulley, you gotta tune for your pulley size no matter what you do. So that's one of them.
To wrap up the pulley size section, there are some very specific scenarios in which the pulley size would matter for the tune, but that specifically would be if it is a new vehicle, a new setup, a new tuner that is unfamiliar with the platform, who has not had the ability to correctly adjust the MAF curve for those upper ranges that accommodate for the higher airflow levels. The reason we don't need to know that is because we have so much experience in these platforms. We know what the MAF curve is supposed to look like. We know how to scale it out into the ranges that your car is not even going to hit. But say it's a customer from Colorado, which I have many. The fact that we have so much experience in these platforms and we know how to set the math curve up properly is what gives them ability to take a road trip to Atlanta and not have any issues.
Yep, exactly. So the next thing that you don't really have to tune for are exhaust components.
This one's probably going to surprise people the most.
Yeah.
And maybe almost as much as pulley size.
So with most of our platforms, again, we know of other platforms. I've heard Subaru need tune for exhaust and stuff like that, but most of ours don't. They just work as is. So a lot of times people get a catback exhaust section and say, hey, do I need to have a retune for this because I just got this piece and I want to get every little bit out of it? Well, you don't really have to have a retune for a catback exhaust. Maybe a downpipe or midpipe sometimes, depending on the car. But the downpipe will just work, reducing your KR, getting all that flow out of there, being lighter weight, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm. The reasons we don't need to know your exact exhaust setup is similar to the reason we don't need to know your exact pulley size. And it actually goes a lot back to the fact that the platforms we cover have a mass airflow sensor. Mm-hmm. If you have a vehicle that runs only on volumetric efficiency and you make a drastic change in the exhaust flow or the exhaust back pressure, that will change the VE of the engine slightly. For the same reason that the pulley sizes are accounted for within that mass airflow sensor, the MAF will also cover slight airflow changes from reduced exhaust back pressure.
So there you go, guys. That's a perfect example of why we don't really need to know if you have a 2.5 inch or a 3 inch or a 5 inch exhaust on your car.
It's actually quite similar to pulley size. It's really on you, the customer, to select the correct exhaust for your setup.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a E85 high compression cams ported head TVS blower car and you have a stock catback on it, you're making a bad choice.
Yep.
I mean, it needs a little bit more flow than that.
Exactly. So next thing we're going to go on, guys, this one's a little bit on the silly side, but just to get an idea of what we've had people ask us about is suspension components. Obviously, guys,
I promise you we're not being mean.
We're not. We're really not. I know it seems obvious, but we have had customers say, hey, I just got coiled, so I need to have my engine retuned for this. Well, guys, this isn't connected to any sensors. It's not going to change any sort of flow. It's not going to do really anything besides adjust the suspension to the way you want it to be on your vehicle. So we don't need to know about your suspension setup when you give us a list of mods. So super easy, pretty straightforward. We'll keep moving. So guys, the next one that we're going to do tuning for that you are going to need are
the proper sensors.
Yes.
Now we have been talking about the MAP sensor. We also have a MAP sensor right here.
Mm-hmm.
Please only use a name brand OEM MAP sensor in your vehicle.
No AutoZone, definitely not any jet maps. No, advanced auto parts, no aftermarket stuff. The OEM MAP sensor is super important, guys.
The reason for this is the OEM MAP sensors are far more consistent than any of the aftermarket ones that we have ever dealt with. There is a possibility that if you have a high performance car that is turned up to 9 out of 10 and you grab an AutoZone MAP sensor, you could end up having a very bad time because the signal that it puts out may be off just enough that your car runs too lean or too rich and causes damage. On the MAP sensor side of it, not only do you need to use the proper OEM sensor, it has to be the correct one. Mm-hmm. Now, LNFs, I know you guys are familiar with, have a very common aftermarket from GM for the Stage 2 upgrade. That is critical because that adjustment has to be made in the tunes that we know which sensor you are on. And when you select those options on the 1.0 page, as Ryan was saying, it's an option there because it's something that it's important.
Yes, because if you put the wrong one in there, your car's going to be throwing a bunch of codes. You're not going to be able to get boost because, guys, these two sensors, a lot of people don't realize how important these two sensors are. Your whole car is based around these two sensors. If your MAP signal is incorrect, then you're not getting any boost and not being able to drive the car. Car's probably going to drive pretty poorly.
Usually the PCM will realize something is way off and throw it into some sort of reduced power mode.
Yep. So I had a customer recently that had like 4 MAF codes. And it was like, hey, I can't get my car to run. I can't make any boost. I'm like, yeah, you got to fix those codes. Like, oh, I didn't know the MAF was that important. Like, your whole entire vehicle is based off of that MAF.
Yeah, the MAF sensor provides way more information than just a typical map sensor.
Yep.
And that's the main reason that GM uses these.
Yes, 100%.
Before I forget,
Yep.
there's one exception, and that is the HPX map that we use in some of the high power builds. However, that starts as an OEM sensor that is then specifically modified and calibrated to a very specific output so that you can have the same type of consistency. That is something that would need to be tuned for, but it's not on the drop-down menu because it's something that almost nobody needs.
Yes.
In very specific circumstances, if it's necessary for your application, we will let you know, and we will give you the corresponding tune file for it.
And that's why you'll be HP tuners to do remote tune for that. If I can also plug one thing, do more remote tunes. You guys really, a lot of guys just want to send the PCM and be done with it, which is great. We have a great option for that, but remote tuning will definitely allow you to stretch your tune as far as it can possibly go.
And the accessibility to remote tuning has gotten much more vast in the past few years. As HP Tuners has gone to the more modern interfaces, the cost has come down greatly.
Yep.
And if the cost is still out of your budget at the time, that's why we have the rental options available, because
Yes.
remote tuning helps us help you.
Yes.
So that's why we have this service available.
100%. All right, guys. So the next thing that we very, very importantly need to know, I've actually got some on the other side. People don't think you need to zoom for these. Are your fuel injectors? So, fuel injectors, guys. Anytime you change these, you have to change the file. Your car doesn't automatically know that, oh, hey, look, I have larger fuel injectors in there.
Yeah, your ECU doesn't go peek in the engine bay to see what type of injectors there are.
Yeah.
It is 100% reliant on the correct data being in the tune file from the start.
Yes, so I've had customers say, oh, I just went up one size. I mean, your PCM should compensate. No, not at all. If your car thinks it has 32-pound injectors and you put 42.5 in there, it's not going to be a very happy car at all.
It's more than just the flow rate too. Different injector styles have different solenoid drivers, so there are different latency times, offset settings, different short pulse width modifiers. There are a lot of things that have to be adjusted for the proper injector.
Absolutely. And in continuation of fuel injectors, something that we need to tune for as well is your fuel itself.
Yeah.
So
This stuff.
that stuff you guys are getting. I get a lot of emails about, hey, I want to go from E85 to 93. Can I just put it in? Or you 3800 guys will say, oh, hey, I'm just going to put a little bit of E85 in there. Stop doing that.
Yeah.
Do not do that. Your car is set up for a very specific amount of fuel from the factory, and when you're tuning along with your injector size, fuel, and then the kind of fuel is, if you go and change your fuel type to either a lower octane or your E85, which requires more fuel system, car is not going to automatically adjust for that.
Nah. And on that note, customers need to be kind of picky about the fuel you get also.
Yes.
Specifically when you're running on pump gas, but it still applies to E85 also, because not all 93 is created equal.
No.
We joke about loaf and jug all the time, because there was a guy that brought a car here that filled up at some small gas station around him, and it blew an engine, and we get it here, and it ran like it had less than 87 in it.
Yeah.
And we finally drained it out, put proper fresh 93 in from our local marathon, and all the problems went away. So if you have the option, it is a really good idea to stick with the same station, or at least the same chain of stations, so that you're getting consistent fuel. Because if the only fuel you have available around you isn't terrific, we can still accommodate for that. We have a lot of customers that the best they have around is 91. This is very common at high elevations like in Colorado, because most cars don't need the higher octane up there. We do need to know that so that we can tune accordingly.
And fuel too, this kind of deviates just slightly. With premium specifically, if you tune for 91 and you go somewhere that has 93, that's actually okay, because that's just going to be a little more knock resistant.
Yeah, a little bit of a safety cushion.
You don't want to go the opposite way. Say you go somewhere where you have 93 and they only have 91. That's not going to be good. Or if you have 91, they only have 89 or 87. Super, super not good.
And if you are on a road trip somewhere and you're in a tight spot and the only thing you can find is 91, it will run.
Yes.
just drive like your grandma's in the passenger seat with an open casserole dish.
Yes.
And your car will survive.
Yes, it will. It will get you point A to point B, but this is under a performance setting. Don't go racing the Challenger that pulls up next to you when you're tuned on 93 and you only have 91.
You already know you're faster than him. Just let it go.
Yeah, like you don't need to prove it to everybody, guys. So that will literally save you an engine or extra wear and tear on it if your car's misfiring and a bunch of stuff like that. Not a good time. So fuel is super, super important. Please keep that in mind and don't just put random fuel in your car from random places. Get good quality fuel. It's a lesson we've all learned here. Don't do it. Next thing seems a little more on the obvious side, but a turbocharger or forced induction change, guys. If you go from a stock KO4 to a Z57, 7163, S257, that's 21 pounds of boost on a KO4 is not the same as 21 pounds of boost on a 7163.
No. And now I will say that as long as you're not beating on the car when the turbo's not doing its work, it won't make any difference. But you will end up in a situation where things are kind of tailored for the turbo that you have on your car. It's difficult for me to get really deep into without getting too techie. It's one of those situations kind of like the 93 if you can only find 91. Like if you put a bigger turbo on your car, you can grandma drive the thing to wherever you need to data log or do what you need to do to get us data to start setting things up appropriately. But we need to know this because there are different safety features that need to be put into place. There, especially with the factory turbocharged cars, there's completely different settings for the wastegate control that need to be applied because different duty cycle on the wastegate is going to give you different amounts of boost pressure. And we need to have those adjustments in there before you ever put the pedal to the floor.
Absolutely. So, like, for instance, myself personally, I changed my turbo out, and before I worked at ZZPerformance, I drove up with a larger turbo in my car. I stayed out of boost and kept that thing below 3,000 RPM because I did my absolute best not getting the boost until my tuner had time to look at it and change what was necessary. So you can do it, but we know a lot of you guys can't resist putting your foot on like, oh, I just want to hear the turbo. Well, no, just relax on that. The next thing, I'm actually going to jump back to we don't have one up here, but U3800 guys, especially U3800 guys, and sometimes Sonic and Ecotec guys too, we don't really need to know how if you overboard your engine.
Oh yeah.
So we'll get 300 guys saying, oh, I got a new engine, I boarded 20 over, or hey, I got different pistons in the car, my bottom end's different, I got different rods. Well, guys, that doesn't really change what the PCM is going to do. As long as you install that properly and did all your work and your install and putting together your engine went great, that's fine. Granted, we do think on the new engine it's a great idea to remote tune and get some logs and stuff like that, but we don't it's not going to change your PCM file because you have 20 thou larger pistons,
right?
Essentially. So same with rods. We've got to say, oh, I just put new rods and I want to have it tuned for the rods. It doesn't really do anything as far on the PCM tuning side. Good idea to monitor stuff. Good idea to get it dialed in for your new stuff, because most times you're building an engine, you're trying to make more power. But for those parts specifically, you're not gonna make more power or do anything more with a 20 over or a 10 thou over or half millimeter over anything. So guys, finally, one of the things that's important to tune for. This is a little different from platform to platform, but your camshaft. So on the 3800, that's why we have a 3800 cam up here. We do kind of need to know what different cam is in your car. Will it run? Probably. Will it run well? No. So the only time you can kind of get away with this on VVT cars, really. But go ahead, Al.
One of the reasons that the car will still run with most cam changes, again, goes back to the fact that the platforms we cover use a mass airflow sensor. Similarly to how a drastic exhaust change will drastically change the volumetric efficiency of the engine, a camshaft drastically changes the volumetric efficiency. So the tune would have to be adjusted on a VE-based vehicle in order to make the car, sometimes even to get it to start. Mm-hmm. The fact that our platforms almost exclusively use a MAF sensor, it can cover the adjustments for the same reason that it can cover different pulley sizes and different altitudes and temperature changes. Yes, there are things in the tune that we need to adjust for. We still need to know what your cam is so that we can set some other things up appropriately. But it's not as airflow based as you would assume.
So guys, and that's a great example too. And then kind of what we're saying about the mass airflow sensor and the cam in general. Sometimes on the variable valve timing cars, for instance, like the L&F Cobalt, the LTG, you can kind of go ahead and just putting them in there, not seeing performance game, just driving the car around. Still wouldn't go beating on the car. No. But it's something that
there's some optimization that needs to happen.
Absolutely. But on like an LSJ and stuff like that, you kind of may not want to put a cam in and just start driving around without and beating on the car like nothing needs to be adjusted.
Yeah, again, it's one of those things where the car will fire up and run, and you're more than welcome to cruise it around if you need to transport the car. But you do not want to go beating on the car full throttle until we have had a chance to update the file appropriately.
Absolutely. All right, guys. So that was kind of a general overview of things you do and don't need to tune for. So once again, we're gonna end this video with a quick summarization of your do's and your don'ts. What you don't need to tune for: most exhaust components, pulley, things like your suspension. Most times a small air filter upgrade, and like I said, belts and other miscellaneous things like that. Those things you don't really need to tune for. And of course, like I said earlier, you don't need to tune for your 20 over or 30 over or half mil over, pistons and stuff like that. Those things you do not need to tune for, or we don't need to know. Another good way to look at it is if we don't ask on the 3000 LSJ, LHU, LNF, any of those pages, we don't really need to know about it. So your exhaust components, pulleys, etc., we don't really need to know about those mods.
Oh, good one that we completely forgot about.
What?
Ported heads.
Ah, yeah.
Now, again, this is kind of like the cam and the drastic exhaust change. It's something that is useful information to have, but this still goes all the way back to the mass airflow sensor. If your ported head flows a little bit more air, the MAF sensor is going to see that and give the corresponding fuel for it.
There it is. Another one we add in there. So, Al, you want to go over our do's to end us up?
The do's. Camshaft. Proper sensors. Fuel injectors. Power adder. And your fuel type and octane level.
Yep. And then there's a few other that we're not mentioning here that are a few of the obvious ones, like the intake where your MAF placement is. That's something we ask on the page, so we need to know because we need to adjust your MAF charts for those.
That really is the best way to get a good idea.
Yes.
If you are wondering if it's information we need to know or not for your base file, just go look at the 1.0 page.
Yep. And then if we need to know anything more for a more aggressive build or something, our tuner will ask, hey, is this car, does it have this setup? Does it have that setup? Etc., etc. So.
And if you think that there's something that we're not covering that could possibly be relevant, you're more than welcome to toss it in the notes section of your order.
Yep, absolutely. You can toss it in the notes. Feel free to comment on this video, and in the meantime of liking it, and make sure you're subscribed to ZZPerformance.com so get more of these videos, coming to you guys and get updates. I think that's where we're gonna stop here to not bore you guys too long. As usual, I'm Ryan D at ZZP.
And I'm Al.
Peace out. We'll see you next time, guys.